It's time for chapters 16 and 17 of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. 16 is called the Oompa Loompas. Oompa Loompas? Everyone said at once. Oompa Loompas? Imported directly from Loompaland, said Mr. Wonka proudly. There's no such place, said Mrs. Salt. Excuse me, my dear lady, but Mr. Wonka, cried Mrs. Salt, I'm a teacher of geography. Then you'll know all about it, said Mr. Wonka. And oh, what a terrible country it is. Nothing but thick jungles infested by the most dangerous beasts in the entire world. Hornswogglers, snores, wangers, those terrible wicked wangdoodles. A wangdoodle would eat 10 Oompa Loompas for breakfast and come galloping back for a second helping. When I went out there, I found little Oompa Loompas living in tree houses. They had to live in tree houses to escape the wangdoodlers and the hornswogglers and the snoreswangers. And they were practically starving to death. They were living on green caterpillars, and the caterpillars tasted revolting, and the Oompa Loompas spent every moment of their days climbing through the treetops, looking for other things to mash up with the caterpillars to make them taste better. Red beetles, for instance, and eucalyptus leaves, and the bark of the bong-bong tree, all of them beastly, but not quite so beastly as the caterpillars. Poor little Oompa Loompas! The one food they longed for more than any other was the cacao bean. But they couldn't get it. An Oompa Loompa was lucky if he found 3 or 4 cacao beans a year. Oh, how they craved them! They used to dream about cacao beans all night and talk about them all day. You only had to mention the word cacao to an Oompa Loompa, and he would start dribbling at the mouth. The cacao bean, Mr. Wonka continued, which grows on the cacao tree, happens to be the thing from which all chocolate is made. You cannot make chocolate without the cacao bean. The cacao bean is chocolate. I myself use billions of cacao beans every week in this factory, and so, my dear children, as soon as I discovered that Oompa Loompas were crazy for this particular food, I climbed up to the treehouse village and poked my head in through the door of the treehouse belonging to the leader of the tribe. The poor little fellow, looking thin and starved, was sitting there trying to eat a bowl full of mashed up green caterpillars without being sick. Look here, I said, speaking not in English, of course, but in Oompa Loompa-ish. Look here, if all of your people will come back to my country and live in my factory, you can have all the cacao beans you want. I've got mountains of them in my storehouse. You can have a cacao beans for every meal. You can gorge yourself silly on them. I'll even pay your wages in cacao if you wish. Do you really mean that? Asked the Oompa Loompa leader, leaping up from his chair. Of course I mean it, and you can have chocolate as well. Chocolate tastes even better than cacao beans because it's got milk and sugar added. The little man gave a great whoop of joy and threw his bowl of mashed caterpillars right out of the treehouse window. It's a deal, he cried. Come on, let's go. And maybe you can see that picture of the Oompa Loompa. So I shipped them all over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. They are wonderful workers. They all speak English now. They love dancing and music. They are always making up songs. I expect you will hear a good deal of singing today from time to time. I must warn you, though, they are rather mischievous. They like jokes. They still wear the same kind of clothes they wore in the jungle, and they insist upon that. The men, as you can see for yourselves across the river, wear only deer skins, and the women wear leaves, and the children wear nothing at all. The women use fresh leaves every day. Daddy, shouted Veruca Salt, the girl who got everything she wanted. Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa. I want you to get me an Oompa Loompa. I want an Oompa Loompa right away. I want to take it home with me. Go on, Daddy, give me an Oompa Loompa. Not now, my pet, her father said to her. "We mustn't interrupt Mr. Wonka." "But I want an Oompa Loompa," screamed Veruca. "All right, Veruca, all right, but I can't get it for you this very second. Please be patient. I will see you have one before the day is out." "Augustus!" cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, sweetheart, I don't think you had better do that. Augustus Gloop, as you might have Augustus Gloop, as you might have guessed, has quietly sneaked down to the edge of the river and was now kneeling on the river bank, scooping hot melted chocolate into his mouth as fast as he could." 17. Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned around and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "Oh no, please, Augustus, please, I beg of you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once." "This stuff is terrific," said Augustus, not taking the slightest note of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Oh boy, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down and wagging his stick in the air, "you must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground with his head far out over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. "Augustus," cried Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving a nasty cold of yours to about 1,000,000 people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus," cried Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning too far out." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek, and then a splash, and into the river Augustus Gloop. In 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" cried Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop, "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help! Help!" he yelled. "Fish me out!" "Don't just stand there!" Mrs. Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something!" "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer to the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. And then, all at once, the powerful suction took a hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the river bank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes!" somebody shouted, pointing upwards, and sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting up inside of it, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once! Where are you going?" "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is even big enough for him to fit through." "It isn't big enough," Charlie Bucket said. "Oh dear, look, he's slowing down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "By golly, he has stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done it," said Mr. Gloop. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Smash the pipe!" yelled Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. "Augustus, come out here at once!" The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, but they could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! Up again he shot like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. "He's disappeared!" yelled Mrs. Gloop. "Where does the pipe go to? Quick, call the fire brigade!" "Keep calm," cried Mr. Wonka. "Keep calm, my dear lady, keep calm. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey, but he'll come out of it just fine. You wait and see." "How can he possibly come out of it just fine? He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds." "Impossible!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd! He would never be made into marshmallows." "And why not?" shouted Mrs. Gloop. "Because that pipe doesn't go to the marshmallow room. It doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make the most delicious kind of strawberry flavored chocolate coated fudge." "Then he'll be made into strawberry flavored chocolate coated fudge!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "My poor Augustus! They'll be selling him by the pound all over the country tomorrow morning." "Quite right," said Mr. Gloop. "I know I'm quite right," said Mrs. Gloop. "It's beyond a joke." "Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so," cried Mrs. Gloop. "Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh like that when my boy's just going on up the pipe? You monster!" she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she were going to run him through. "You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy up into the fudge room just like that is one great colossal joke?" "He'll be perfectly safe," said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. "He'll be chocolate fudge!" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Here's Mrs. Gloop yelling at Willy Wonka. "Never!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Of course he will!" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "I wouldn't allow it," said Mr. Wonka. "And why not?" shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "Because he would taste terrible. Just imagine, Augustus flavored chocolate coating Gloop. No one would buy it." "They most certainly would." "I don't want to think about it," shrieked Mrs. Gloop. "Nor do I," said Mr. Wonka. "And I do promise you, madame, that your darling boy is perfectly safe." "If he's perfectly safe, where is he? Lead me to him this instant," snapped Mrs. Gloop. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, 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 3 times. Immediately the Oompa Loompa appeared as if from nowhere and stood beside him. Here's a picture of the Oompa Loompas. Oops, can you see? The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing his beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. "Now listen to me," said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. "I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find their son Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe." The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. "Oh, do be quiet," said Mr. Wonka. "Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think at all it's funny." "You can say that again." "Go straight to the fudge room," Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa, "and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm certain you'll find him there, but you better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get poured out into the fudge boiler, and that would really be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite uneatable." Miss Gloop let out a shriek of fury. "I'm joking," said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. "I didn't mean it. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop and Mr. Gloop. Goodbye, goodbye."